Rachel Sullivan walked out of the courthouse as a single mother with less than $120 to her name, an old car, and a 9-year-old daughter who still believed they were going home. But there was no home anymore. Rachel thought her divorce had taken everything from her. She was wrong, because years before he died, her father had secretly prepared for the day his daughter might lose everything. Hidden in a forgotten Tennessee town was a family inheritance no one knew existed an abandoned workshop left in Rachel's name. She thought it was worthless. She almost walked away. And if she had, she never would have discovered what her father had hidden behind those rusted doors, or the reason he'd kept it secret for so many years. What Rachel found inside didn't simply help this single mother start over. It revealed one final lesson from her father and completely changed the way she would rebuild her life and raise her daughter. Stay with this story, because sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't money. It's what someone who loved you prepared for the day you thought you had nothing left. Before we open that workshop door, subscribe and stay with me, because what Rachel finds inside isn't just a secret. It's something every parent should hear. That morning, Rachel Sullivan believed Ryan had taken everything from her. She had no idea her father had spent years making sure that would never be completely true. Rachel was 36 when she walked out of the courthouse carrying a thin envelope that officially ended her marriage. Ryan got the house, most of their savings, the furniture, and nearly everything they had spent years building together. But losing the house hurt for a reason no court document could ever explain. Inside the kitchen doorway were 9 little pencil marks, one for every birthday of Rachel's daughter, Lily. Every year, Rachel had stood her against that frame, balanced a book on her head, and marked another inch of childhood beside the date. Now even those little marks belonged to a house they could no longer call home. Rachel reached their aging sedan and found Lily asleep in the back seat, curled beneath her mother's coat with a worn, stuffed rabbit tucked beneath her chin. They had less than $120 left, enough for a few nights in a cheap motel. After that, Rachel had no idea where they would go. She sat behind the wheel for a long moment, pretending to search through her purse because she was afraid that once the tears started, she wouldn't be able to stop them. Then Lily stirred. "Mom?" Rachel turned around. The little girl's eyes were still heavy with sleep. "Are we going home now?" There are questions a mother carries for the rest of her life. That would become one of Rachel's. She forced a smile. "Not yet, sweetheart." Lily simply nodded. She trusted her mother completely. And somehow, that trust hurt more than everything Ryan had taken. Before Rachel could start the car, her phone rang. It was her attorney. "Rachel," the woman said quietly, "I need you to listen carefully. We found something Ryan's lawyers missed." Rachel almost laughed. There was nothing left to find. At least, that was what she believed. Then the attorney mentioned her father. Samuel Sullivan had been gone for nearly 4 years, and hearing his name still opened a place inside Rachel that she had learned not to touch. "Your father transferred a property into your name years ago," the attorney continued. "It was never parts of your marriage. Ryan has no claim to it." Rachel sat straighter. "Property?" Samuel had never told her about any property. "It's an old workshop outside Cedar Hollow, Tennessee. According to the county assessment, it isn't worth much." Rachel looked into the rearview mirror. Lily was already asleep again. A nearly worthless workshop in a forgotten Tennessee town wasn't exactly the miracle Rachel needed. It couldn't give Lily her bedroom back. It couldn't erase the debt. It couldn't restore the life that had just been dismantled. But it belonged to Rachel. And when someone has almost nothing left, the word mine can suddenly mean everything. What Rachel didn't know was why her father had kept that workshop secret. She didn't know why Samuel had made certain no husband, creditor, or court could ever take it from her. And she certainly didn't know what was waiting behind its rusted doors. By nightfall, Rachel and Lily would be driving toward Cedar Hollow with everything they still owned packed into the trunk. Rachel thought she was going there because she had nowhere else to go. She was wrong. Her father hadn't simply left her an old workshop. He had left his daughter a way to rebuild everything that life had taken from her. By late afternoon, Rachel had packed everything she and Lily still owned into the trunk of the old sedan. 3 boxes of clothes, a grocery bag filled with Lily's school books, a few framed photographs Rachel had managed to save, Samuel's old wool jacket, and the stuffed rabbit Lily refused to travel without. That was what remained of a life Rachel had once believed was permanent. As they pulled away from the city, Lily pressed her forehead against the window. Is Cedar Hollow our new home? Rachel tightened her hands around the steering wheel. I don't know yet, sweetheart. It was the most truthful answer she could give. The drive took a little over 4 hours. With every mile, the crowded highways gave way to 2-lane roads, wooded hills, weathered barns, and fields glowing beneath the late afternoon sun. Rachel had spent years measuring security in bank statements, property values, and retirement accounts. Now everything she owned was riding behind her in an aging car. And somehow, Lily was humming. That sound kept Rachel driving. They reached Cedar Hollow just before sunset. The town was smaller than Rachel expected, a quiet stretch of brick storefronts. A diner with a faded red awning, an old hardware store, a white church steeple rising above maple trees. People moved slowly there. Nobody seemed to be rushing toward anything. Rachel almost found that unsettling. She followed the directions out of town until the pavement narrowed and eventually became gravel. Then the GPS announced that they had arrived. Rachel stopped the car. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. The workshop stood beyond a field of waist-high weeds. It was worse than Rachel had imagined. The long building was made of weathered timber and corrugated metal streaked orange with rust. Several windows were cracked. One corner of the roof sagged badly enough that Rachel wondered whether the next hard storm might bring it down. Lily stared through the windshield. That's ours. Rachel almost laughed. Almost. Apparently, this was the thing her father had protected so carefully. This ruin. For one painful moment, Rachel wondered whether coming there had been a mistake. Then Lily opened her door. Wait. But the girl was already walking toward the building. Rachel hurried after her. The main entrance was secured with an old padlock, so they circled around until Rachel discovered a side door swollen by years of rain. She leaned against it with her shoulder. Once, twice. On the third push, the wood groaned and the door opened several inches. A smell drifted out. Old wood. Dust. Machine oil. Rachel froze. She knew that smell. When she was a child, Samuel would come home from work carrying it on his clothes. Rachel used to complain whenever he hugged her before changing because the scent stayed in her hair. She would have given anything now to smell it on him one more time. Rachel pushed the door farther open. Inside, fading sunlight revealed workbenches, shelves of tools, heavy machines beneath canvas covers, and hundreds of small containers arranged with almost obsessive precision. This wasn't an abandoned storage building. It was a workshop. A real one. Lily wandered toward an old wooden stool beside the largest workbench. On the wall above it hung a faded photograph of Samuel as a much younger man. Lily looked from the photograph to Rachel. Grandpa worked here. Rachel couldn't answer immediately. She ran her fingers across the workbench, leaving a clean trail through years of dust. Then she noticed the labels. Bolts. Washers. Fittings. Each one written in Samuel's unmistakable block handwriting. Her father had stood exactly where she was standing. He had worked here. For years, perhaps. And he had never told her. Mom? Lily had crouched beside the far end of the workbench. What is it? There's something under here. Rachel walked over. Hidden deep beneath the bench was an old wooden chest reinforced with dark metal bands. Unlike everything surrounding it, the lid carried much less dust. Rachel's heartbeat changed. Someone had wanted this chest protected. She knelt and pulled it forward. A heavy padlock hung from the latch. Lily looked at her mother. "Do you have the key?" Rachel stared at the lock. "No." Then she looked around at the tools her father had left behind. For the first time since leaving the courthouse, something stronger than fear moved through her. Curiosity. Samuel had hidden this place from everyone. Then he had hidden something else inside it. And whatever was locked in that chest might finally explain why. Rachel reached for a heavy pry bar hanging on the wall. She still believed she had come to Cedar Hollow because she had nowhere else to go. She was about to discover that her father had been waiting years for her to arrive. Rachel waited until Lily had stepped several feet back before sliding the pry bar beneath the chest's rusted latch. "Cover your ears, sweetheart." Lily obeyed. Rachel pushed down. Nothing. She tried again, putting more of her weight behind it. The old wood groaned, but the lock held. For a moment, Rachel almost stopped. Breaking into something her father had deliberately locked felt strangely wrong, as though Samuel might walk through the door at any second and ask what on earth she thought she was doing. Then she remembered. He had put this building in her name. Whatever was inside, he had meant for her to find it. Rachel pushed one last time. The wood split with a sharp crack. The lock struck the concrete floor. Lily jumped. Rachel's heart was pounding as she slowly lifted the lid. Inside were several leather-bound notebooks, a small velvet pouch, a tarnished silver key on a leather cord, and a thick cream-colored envelope. Rachel stopped breathing. Her name was written across the front. Rachel. She would have recognized that handwriting anywhere. "Is that Grandpa's?" Lily whispered. Rachel nodded. Her hands began to tremble. "Yeah, baby, it is." She opened the velvet pouch first. Several heavy gold coins rolled into her palm. Rachel stared at them. She didn't know exactly what they were worth, but she knew enough to understand that this was real money. Rent, food, a deposit on an apartment, maybe months without waking at 3 in the morning wondering how she was going to keep Lily safe. Rachel closed her fingers around the coins. Samuel had left her an emergency fund. But why hide it here? She reached for the envelope. Inside were several handwritten pages. Rachel sat on the dusty floor while Lily settled beside her. The first line nearly broke her. "My dearest Rachel." Samuel wrote that if she was reading the letter, then he was gone. But he also wrote something Rachel wasn't prepared to hear. He had worried about Ryan. From the beginning. Samuel had seen something in him Rachel couldn't see while she was in love, a man who measured people by what they could give him, who needed control more than companionship. Samuel had wanted to warn her, but he knew that pushing too hard might drive his daughter away. So instead of forcing Rachel to choose between her husband and her father, Samuel had quietly done the only thing he knew how to do. He prepared for failure. He called the workshop his fail-safe. Rachel lowered the letter. Tears blurred the words. All those years she had believed her father was simply being stubborn. She had defended Ryan. She had even told Samuel once that he needed to trust her judgment. And he had. That was the part that hurt most. Samuel had respected her choice, even while quietly preparing somewhere safe for her to land if that choice destroyed her. Lily leaned against her shoulder. "Why are you crying?" "Mom?" Rachel wiped her cheek. "Because Grandpa was taking care of us before we knew we needed him." She continued reading. The gold, Samuel explained, was the first gift. Freedom. Enough to help Rachel leave. Breathe. And begin again without depending on anyone. She could sell it. Walk away from Cedar Hollow. Never look back. For a few seconds, Rachel imagined exactly that. A small apartment. A bedroom for Lily. A refrigerator filled with groceries. Clean sheets. No Ryan. No courthouse. No fear. She could finally stop fighting. Then she reached the next paragraph. Samuel had underlined one sentence. But the gold is not what I brought you here to find. Rachel stared at the words. Below them were instructions. Go to the north end of the main workbench. Look carefully at the floor. The boards there run in the wrong direction. Rachel stood. Lily followed. Together they brushed years of dust from the wooden floor until Rachel saw it. A rectangular section of boards lay differently from all the others. At its edge was a recessed iron ring. Rachel hooked her fingers through it and pulled. The hidden panel rose slowly. Beneath it was a shallow compartment covered with heavy oilcloth. Two large shapes rested inside. Rachel climbed down and pulled back the first cover. Black paint appeared beneath the cloth. Then chrome. Then the sweeping lines of a motorcycle, unlike anything Rachel had ever seen. She uncovered the second. Another vintage machine. Beautiful. Nearly complete. Preserved like two sleeping animals waiting to breathe again. Rachel looked at Lily. Lily looked back at her. Neither spoke. Then Rachel noticed a page tucked beneath the second cover. More of Samuel's handwriting. Only 4 words were written across the top. The second gift, Rachel. And suddenly, the gold in Rachel's pocket no longer felt like the biggest secret her father had left behind. Rachel remained beside the open floor compartment, staring at the 2 motorcycles as if they had somehow risen out of another lifetime. Lily crouched beside her. Were these Grandpa's? Rachel slowly nodded. I think they were. She picked up the page marked The Second Gift. Rachel and continued reading. Samuel explained that the workshop had been his secret life. For decades, he had spent evenings and weekends restoring machines other people had given up on, engines seized by rust, motorcycles forgotten in barns, parts that hadn't been manufactured in generations. The 2 machines beneath the floor were his greatest unfinished work. He had found them years apart, both barely recognizable beneath corrosion and neglect. Piece by piece, he had brought them back. But time had beaten him. One motorcycle still needed electrical work and careful engine tuning. The other required several components to be machined and assembled. Samuel hadn't lived long enough to finish either one. Rachel looked around the workshop differently now. The machines beneath the canvas covers were no longer meaningless pieces of equipment. The labeled drawers weren't clutter. The worn workbench wasn't just old furniture. This place had been part of her father, a part she had never known. Then she read the next paragraph. Samuel explained that the motorcycles, once completed, could be extremely valuable. Rachel read that sentence twice. Her first thought was Lily. A home. A safe neighborhood. A bedroom with curtains her daughter could choose herself. Money in the bank. No more counting dollars at the grocery store. No more pretending everything was fine. For the first time since the divorce, Rachel could see an exit. Mom, Lily asked, does this mean we don't have to be scared anymore? Rachel looked at her daughter. That question hurt because she realized Lily had known. Children always knew more than adults wanted to believe. Maybe, Rachel whispered. But Samuel's letter wasn't finished. He told Rachel she could sell the gold, hire someone to complete the motorcycles, and then sell them too. If she chose that path, he wanted her to feel no guilt. A father, he wrote, should want his child to be safe. Rachel almost smiled through her tears. There it was. Permission. She could take the easy road. And for Lily's sake, perhaps she should. Then Samuel offered another choice. The leather-bound books inside the chest weren't ordinary notebooks. They were his journals. Years of measurements, diagrams, mistakes, solutions, suppliers, techniques, and handwritten instructions. Everything Rachel needed to understand his work was there. Samuel wasn't simply leaving her something valuable. He was offering her the chance to learn how value was created. Rachel's eyes settled on one sentence. Money can rescue you once. Knowing how to build something can rescue you for the rest of your life. She closed her eyes. For years, Rachel's life with Ryan had been about having things. The right house, the right furniture, enough money, the appearance of security. And in a matter of months, almost all of it had disappeared. She had spent so long believing security was something another person could provide that she had never asked what would happen if that person took it away. Samuel had asked. Years before she did. Rachel ran her hand across the worn cover of the first journal. For the first time, the workshop didn't look like the remains of her father's past. It looked like a question about her future. She could sell everything and give Lily comfort. Or she could attempt something terrifying. She could stay, learn, finish what Samuel had started, build something with her own hands. The sensible choice seemed obvious. Rachel was a mother with almost no money and a child depending on her. She wasn't a mechanic. She had never rebuilt an engine. She didn't even know the names of half the tools surrounding her. Then Lily opened one of Samuel's journals. A small photograph slipped from between the pages and landed on the floor. Rachel picked it up. It showed Samuel standing outside this very workshop years earlier, smiling beside an unfinished motorcycle. On the back, he had written, "Someday, I hope she understands why I kept this place." Rachel pressed the photograph against her chest. All afternoon, she had believed her father had left her a way to escape. Now she understood. Samuel had left her something much harder. A choice. That night, Rachel and Lily slept in the car beside the workshop. The gold was only a few feet away. So were two motorcycles that might change their financial future. Rachel barely slept, because for the first time since her marriage ended, nobody else was deciding what happened next. Not Ryan. Not a lawyer. Not a judge. The decision belonged entirely to her. And strangely, that freedom frightened Rachel more than having nothing at all. Rachel didn't make her decision that night, or the next morning. For 3 days, she and Lily lived between the old sedan and the workshop, as if their lives had stopped somewhere between what they had lost and whatever came next. Rachel counted the gold more than once. Every time, the same thought returned. Sell it. Take Lily somewhere comfortable. Find an apartment. Get a steady job. Forget Cedar Hollow ever existed. It would have been responsible, maybe even wise. But every time Rachel prepared herself to leave, she found Lily inside the workshop, sitting at Samuel's old bench with one of his journals open in front of her. The little girl couldn't understand the diagrams. She simply liked seeing her grandfather's handwriting. On the third morning, Lily looked up. "Mom, did Grandpa know we were coming?" Rachel stopped. "No, sweetheart. He couldn't have." Lily considered that. Then why did he leave everything ready for us? Rachel had no answer. That afternoon, she made her choice. She would not sell the motorcycles. Not yet. Instead, Rachel took a small portion of the gold into a larger town about 30 miles away and converted enough of it into cash to give them breathing room. She rented a modest furnished room above Cedar Hollow's diner. It wasn't much. 1 bedroom, a tiny kitchen, a bathroom with a faucet that dripped all night. Rachel gave Lily the bed and took the pull-out couch. That first evening, Lily stood in the middle of the room and smiled. "We have a home." Rachel turned towards the window before her daughter could see her cry. The next morning, she returned to the workshop and began. Not on the motorcycles. She wasn't ready for them. She started with a broom. Years of dust covered everything. Cobwebs hung from the rafters. Rain had stained one wall, and part of the roof needed reinforcement. Rachel swept, scrubbed, carried out broken boards, washed windows until sunlight finally reached corners that had been dark for years. Lily helped after school, wiping drawers and reading Samuel's handwritten labels aloud. Washers. Good. Bearings? Good. Lily held up another container. Car. Burator. Rachel laughed. Carburetor? Neither of them knew exactly what one did. For the first time in months, that didn't feel frightening. They could learn. As the workshop came back to life, Cedar Hollow began noticing them. A gray-haired man named Walter, who owned the hardware store, stopped by one afternoon carrying 2 cups of coffee and a hot chocolate. He stood silently when he saw Samuel's workbench. "You're Sam Sullivan's girl." Rachel hadn't heard anyone call her that in years. "You knew my father." Walter smiled. "Knew him. Your father could take something everyone else had given up on and make it useful again?" His eyes moved toward the covered motorcycles. "Looks like he left you plenty to do." Rachel admitted she knew almost nothing about restoration. Walter shrugged. Neither did Sam once. That sentence stayed with her. Rachel began spending her evenings reading Samuel's journals. At first, they seemed written in another language: clearances, timing, wiring, tolerances, machining. But between the technical notes were pieces of her father. Ruined another fitting today. Got impatient. That's what impatience costs. On another page, don't force a part because you're angry. Metal doesn't care about your feelings. Stop. Think. Start again. Rachel smiled when she read that one. It sounded like advice about far more than machines. Weeks passed. She learned how to clean tools properly, how to identify components, how to use measuring instruments. Walter introduced her to a retired mechanic who occasionally answered questions but refused to do the work for her. "If this is going to be yours," he told her, "your hands need to learn it." So Rachel's hands learned. Slowly. Painfully. She made mistakes. And then came the first serious one. While working on a small component, Rachel misread one of Samuel's measurements and damaged a difficult-to-replace part. She stared at it in horror. Hours of work? Money they couldn't afford to waste. Gone. That evening, Rachel sat alone at Samuel's bench with an auction company's phone number written on a piece of paper. One call. That was all it would take. Sell the motorcycles. End the uncertainty. Be sensible. Then Lily came downstairs carrying 2 bowls of soup. She placed one beside her mother and noticed the damaged part. Did it break? Rachel swallowed. I broke it. Lily was quiet for a moment. Then she asked the question Rachel would remember for years. Can you learn how to fix it? Rachel looked at her daughter. Then at Samuel's journals. Then at her own grease-stained hands. Until that moment, Rachel had believed the opportunity her father left her was the workshop. She was beginning to understand it wasn't. The opportunity was becoming someone who no longer had to be rescued. Rachel folded the auction company's number in half. Then she opened Samuel's journal and started again. Winter came early to Cedar Hollow. By then, Rachel barely recognized the woman who had arrived months earlier with less than $120, a frightened child, and everything she owned packed into an old sedan. Her hands had changed first. The soft hands she once kept carefully manicured were now rough, nicked, and permanently marked with traces of grease. There were small burns on her wrists and a thin scar across one knuckle from the day a wrench slipped. Rachel was strangely proud of every one of them. They were proof that she was no longer waiting for someone else to fix her life. She was building one. The workshop changed with her. The broken windows had been repaired, the roof no longer leaked. Samuel's machines had been cleaned and brought back into service one by one. And in the center of the floor stood the first motorcycle. Almost finished? Rachel had spent weeks rebuilding its electrical system according to Samuel's journals. What once looked like a meaningless tangle of colored wires now made sense to her. One cold evening, Lily sat at Samuel's workbench doing homework while Rachel made the final connection. All right, Rachel whispered. She connected the battery. Nothing happened. Her stomach dropped. Then she noticed one loose terminal. She tightened it and tried again. The headlight came alive. A warm beam cut across the workshop. Rachel stared at it. Then she laughed. Not the polite laugh she had learned during years of pretending everything was fine. A real laugh. Lily jumped from her chair. You did it. Rachel pulled her daughter into her arms. We did something. That distinction mattered. Because somewhere along the way, the workshop had stopped belonging only to Samuel and Rachel. Lily had become part of it too. She knew where the wrenches belonged. She could recognize a spark plug. She had even started keeping a little notebook beside her grandfather's journals. One afternoon, Rachel found Lily carefully copying one of Samuel's diagrams. What are you doing? Lily shrugged. Grandpa wrote things down for you. Maybe someday you'll write things down for me? Rachel couldn't speak. She turned away under the excuse of looking for a tool and wiped her eyes with the back of her sleeve. Until then, Rachel had thought she was finishing her father's work. She suddenly understood that something much larger was happening. Samuel had taught his daughter from pages written years before, and now his granddaughter was watching those lessons become real. 3 generations. 1 workbench, 1 unfinished story. But Rachel's transformation wasn't complete. The hardest test came several weeks later. She had finally reached the stage where the engine should start. Rachel checked everything twice. Fuel. Oil. Electrical connections. Timing. Lily stood several feet away, wearing oversized safety glasses. Rachel turned the ignition and tried. The engine coughed, then died. She tried again. Nothing. A third attempt produced only a hollow mechanical click. The old Rachel would have panicked. She would have assumed failure meant she wasn't capable. Maybe Ryan had been right about her. Maybe she needed someone stronger, smarter, more experienced to take over. That thought still appeared. But it no longer controlled her. Rachel stepped away from the motorcycle. She washed her hands, made coffee, then opened Samuel's journal. Near the bottom of one page, she found a sentence circled twice. When a machine won't tell you what's wrong, stop trying to make it obey. Listen. Rachel returned to the motorcycle. This time, she listened. She traced the system slowly until she discovered a tiny problem she had overlooked. She corrected it. But she didn't start the engine. Not yet. Something told her that moment deserved daylight. The following morning, snow fell quietly outside the workshop. Rachel opened the big doors. Cold air swept inside. Lily stood beside her. Rachel placed her hand on the motorcycle. Months earlier, she had wanted to sell it because she believed its value was measured in dollars. Now she knew better. Its real value was in everything it had forced her to become. Patient, capable, independent, unwilling to surrender simply because something was difficult. Rachel looked at Lily. Nervous. Lily smiled. A little. Rachel smiled back. So am I. She turned toward the motorcycle. And in that moment, Rachel understood something her father had probably known all along. Samuel hadn't hidden these machines because he wanted his daughter to inherit his masterpieces. He had hidden them because one day, Rachel might need to discover that she was capable of becoming the kind of woman who could finish them. Her hand closed around the starter. Lily watched. And Rachel tried one more time. Rachel pressed the starter. The engine turned once, then stopped. For half a second, the workshop became so quiet she could hear the winter wind moving through the trees outside. Lily said nothing. Rachel tried again. The engine coughed, struggled, and fell silent. Months earlier, that sound would have crushed her. She would have heard failure. This time, Rachel heard something else. Almost. She rested one hand on the fuel tank. Come on, she whispered. One more time. Then she tried again. The engine caught. A deep roar exploded through the workshop. Lily screamed with joy. Rachel froze. The sound filled every corner of the building, rattling tools against the walls and vibrating through the concrete beneath her boots. But Rachel barely heard the machine. She heard her father. She remembered Samuel coming home with oil on his clothes, his quiet warnings she had once dismissed, his handwriting filling page after page, the workshop he had protected without ever telling her why. And suddenly, Rachel was crying. Not the desperate tears she had cried after the divorce. These were different. Lily ran toward her. "You did it, Mom?" Rachel dropped to her knees and wrapped both arms around her daughter. "No," she whispered through her tears. "We finished what Grandpa started." Behind them, the engine continued to run. Samuel would never hear it. But his daughter had brought his unfinished work to life. And his granddaughter was there to witness it. For Rachel, 3 generations had somehow met in that single sound. The second motorcycle took several more weeks. By then, Rachel no longer approached Samuel's journals like a frightened beginner searching for instructions. She understood them. Sometimes she even disagreed with them. Once, she caught herself writing a different solution in the margin. She stared at her handwriting beside her father's and smiled. The journals weren't Samuel's anymore. They had become a conversation. By spring, both motorcycles stood completed beneath the workshop lights. Rachel could have sold them. The money would have changed everything. A larger house, a newer car, college savings for Lily, security. There had been a time when Rachel would have chosen those things without hesitation. But now, standing inside the workshop, she realized something. She already had what she had been searching for. Not wealth, a life that belonged to her. Rachel used part of the remaining gold to repair the building properly and establish a small restoration business. She named it Sullivan Legacy Restoration. At first, the jobs were modest. An old motorcycle someone had inherited from his father. A damaged engine a retired farmer couldn't bear to throw away. Machines that weren't necessarily worth much on paper, but meant everything to the people who brought them through Rachel's doors. And Rachel understood those people. She had learned that sometimes an old machine wasn't just metal. Sometimes it was a memory you could touch. Word spread. Work came. Slowly, the little business began paying its own bills. One afternoon, Walter stopped outside and looked at the new sign above the workshop door. "Sam would have liked that," he said. Rachel looked up at it. "I hope so." Walter shook his head. "No need to hope." Months passed without Rachel thinking much about Ryan. That realization surprised her more than anything. Once, she had imagined becoming successful enough to make him regret what he had done. She had pictured him discovering that the woman he left with almost nothing had ended up with something worth far more than the house he'd fought so hard to keep. But Rachel no longer wanted him to know. She didn't need his regret. She didn't need his apology. She didn't even need him to understand. Because a life built to prove someone else wrong still belongs partly to that person. Rachel wanted hers back completely. One warm Saturday morning, she rolled Samuel's finished motorcycle outside. Lily stood beside the workshop doors. "Are you scared?" Rachel smiled. "Not anymore." She started the engine. Then she looked back. Lily stood beneath the Sullivan Legacy Restoration sign, waving with both hands. For just a moment, Rachel imagined Samuel standing beside her. She eased onto the country road. The workshop disappeared slowly in her mirror. Rachel had first arrived in Cedar Hollow believing she was homeless. Now she understood that a home wasn't something a court could award to one person and take from another. A home could be built again. With work, with memory, with people you loved, and sometimes with the courage to begin when all you had left was an old workshop, a frightened little girl, and someone from the past who had believed in you long before you learned to believe in yourself. One evening, as Rachel prepared to close the workshop, she noticed Lily standing against the old wooden doorframe with a pencil in her hand. "What are you doing?" Rachel asked. Lily smiled. "Seeing how much I've grown." She drew a small line above her head and wrote the date beside it. Rachel froze. She remembered the pencil marks in the house. Ryan had kept the ones she once believed were pieces of Lily's childhood she had lost forever. Now she understood. The memories had never belonged to that house. They belonged to the people who made them. Across the workshop sat Samuel's old journals. Beside them was Rachel's notebook, filled with everything she had learned. And next to that was Lily's little notebook. 3 generations, one unfinished story being passed forward. Samuel couldn't protect his daughter from every heartbreak, so he left her something better than protection. He left her the knowledge and courage to rebuild. And Rachel finally understood what inheritance truly meant. The greatest inheritance isn't what someone leaves in your hands. It's what they leave inside you and what you choose to pass on. Maybe something in your own life has ended: a marriage, a career, a home, or time with someone you loved. You may never get the old life back, but that doesn't mean your story is over. Rachel arrived in Cedar Hollow because she had nowhere left to go. She stayed because she discovered where she belonged. And as she looked at Lily's new pencil mark beside that workshop door, Rachel realized something she would never forget. Nothing that truly mattered had been taken from her. She was carrying it forward. So let me leave you with one question. What did someone you loved leave inside you that you're still carrying today? Share it in the comments. And if you believe it's never too late to rebuild a life, subscribe and stay with us. Sometimes an ending isn't the end. It's simply where rebuilding begins.